A little while ago, I did a video on the Wheel of Time, and it was kind of a ranty thing over the Wheel of Time series. I read the first 3-ish books, and I want to break down each one of those books that I read. And before I get going, everyone keeps telling me, oh, you should read, and then it gets really good at this book and this book. And it's like, if I don't care about a character, a scenario, a world in book 1, why the hell am I going to stay there for God knows how many books? The Eye of the World is your fantasy by numbers book. It has very much every cliche of Tolkien-esque fantasy in existence within the first page. And that's a problem for me. I love Tolkien. I'm a massive Lord of the Rings geek. But Tolkien has this ability to draw from fairy tales, from mythology, from pagan mythology, from Christian mythology, from Norse mythology, Celtic mythology, Welsh mythology, and melt it into this big, homunculus thing that is the Lord of the Rings. This just didn't feel that concise. Like, it has all this mythology, but it's so clumsy. Arthurial legend is a big theme of the Wheel of Time books, and it's so clumsily done. This is that weird trope of post-apocalyptic fantasy, like the Shannara Chronicles. So, for anyone who doesn't know, the Shannara Chronicles are written by Terry Brooks, and they are a post-apocalyptic fantasy. They are floopy as hell, and I hated every single one. And that's how this felt to me. It just felt like the Shannara novels. And I think we can all agree that the Shannara Chronicles television show was shit. This just felt like that to me. It just felt like take fantasy elements and reuse them over and over and over. On a technical level, I didn't enjoy the writing style, and I like epic fantasy. I love that kind of big drawing energy fantasy. And this wasn't it. The writing style is clumsy to me. It didn't flow. There was no backbone to it, and it just felt very soft in places. And that's disappointing, to say the least, on the subject, because everyone kept building this up. And Daniel Green, I blame you completely for me wasting my time on these books. It just got to a point where I got like, I don't care about any of this. And the writing just didn't help that. Everyone is very shallow, and maybe that changes for the latter books, but if you're not going to pull me in book 1, I'm not going to stick around for book 12. The things to do. Okay, so the opening of the book is this very Shire, obviously very Lord of the Rings inspired part. And then that's where it just keeps going. It's Arthurial Lord of the Rings. And like I said, I love Lord of the Rings. But this, oh no. Let's take every fantasy character from a D&D game and put them in a book. That's literally where I was with this. Like, were these just drawn up on those sheets you get to build your characters? Like, why? Like, if you've got no... I don't know, if you haven't got the guts to create something different with the genre that you are trying to do, why do it? The world building, I will say, is okay, but the world building draws so much from Tolkien that it just feels clumsy in places. There's a lot of information dumping. There's a lot of characters explaining things just out of nowhere. Again, the show don't tell thing where you do kind of have to balance that out. And in fantasy, you do have to balance between the two. And it just didn't balance for me. It was a really unbalanced, really uneven reading experience. I switched between the book and the audiobook, and each just drove me insane. I couldn't deal with it either. Whoever narrated the audiobook needs to be fired. Ugh. If a book doesn't draw me in, and I don't get this whole notion, oh, you need to keep reading for the payoff and all of this in book whatever, book a zillion of a zillion. Why? A series should be good from the get-go and pull you in. And I get it that writers evolve. Why is this such a thing? Like, you would think I literally slapped someone's dog with the reaction I got to that video. He can't write. I know he's loved in the fantasy community, but I don't like his work. And it's so clumsy and no flow and information dumping and characters built from archetypes that have been done so many times better before and after. Like, I've read a lot of epic, big, scrawling fantasy, and I love it, but this was not it. And that's the problem I have. Like, if you're gonna do this big, sprawling fantasy thing, do it well and do it right. Sometimes you just have to, and I think you need to pull people in from book 1. You need to pull people in and keep it going. There are better books, and I kind of put this on the fluff pile of overused fantasy tropes like the Shannara Chronicles. It didn't have any backbone, it didn't have any guts, and The Eye of the World just left me feeling really cold. I forced myself into book 2, there'll be another video, by the way, this is part of a series, and it just kind of, I don't know what, I couldn't find anything good about this book. It felt tropey, it felt overused, it felt like a book I have read a million times before. I mean, I would kind of put it next to Prior of the Orange Tree for just generic and bad. It's not a good book. And I get that it's loved, but fantasy literature should be, I don't know, if you're going to do Tolkien, embrace the Tolkien. That's what I say. Don't take it, subvert it, do whatever, but use those tropes and use them well. Don't just take Tolkien and write fan fiction. That's all this felt like to me, was Lord of the Rings fan fiction. And I'm going to talk more in depth about book 2 and 3, the other two that I read, in other videos that are coming up, so do keep an eye out for them. And I know you're all going to hate me for this, but the Eye of the World was just crap. Like, what is the big deal over this book? Hello, welcome back. This is part whatever of why I hated the Wheel of Time books. Sorry, my voice is going today because hay fever from hell, so hello. Where do we start? So The Great Hunt is book 2. I will say this about book 2. The writing was more concise. It was better world building, I will say that. Characterization still felt like it was ripped out of a D&D game. So, what did I like? I did think the improvement in the writing did give a better story. The flow was better. It was a little bit more concise. And I actually thought things were going to go really well with this. The problem is I still couldn't care about any of these characters, their motivations, the story. I couldn't care about anything because the characters, to me, and this is just a personal thing, felt very one-dimensional. It just frustrated me still. There was a lot of really good ideas, but nothing seemed to be executed in any particularly great fashion. There was lots of potential, but that was it. Where else do we start? The writing was still all over the place, very inconsistent. I don't know if that was down to the writer, but it may have been the editor, because, again, there's a lot of cooks in a kitchen when it comes to a novel. I will say that. So I can't put the blame on anyone in particular, but given the era it was written, it was probably quite rushly edited, just because of fantasy at the time and so on. It still felt like Lord of the Rings fan fiction, in the sense that there was no, it still didn't feel completely original. I did like the Arthurian legends stuff that creeps in. I'm a King Arthur geek. I've studied the myths of the British Isles. But again, it just felt like, let's just use this because it's cool, rather than having any actual depth. There were still story cues and story beats from Lord of the Rings and other fantasy novels of that ilk, and I love Lord of the Rings. And that's where it kind of starts to fall apart even more. It's a slow book. Like, I've read people call Lord of the Rings a slow book. But at least in Lord of the Rings, there's something to keep you interested. In its slower sections, there is still something there that keeps you into it. This doesn't have it. The information dumping is still annoying, and information dumps are not world building. I'm sorry, but they're not. And it just ended up feeling just boring and dry and uninteresting, and it just... Like, the first half of the book was actually really enjoyable and I was getting into it. Despite its flaws, I was beginning to get into it. And then the second half happened and I died a little. It ended up dragging to the point that by the time I got to the end, I felt like I don't care about any of this. I didn't care about the characters. And also sudden tonal shifts as well, which I found just really off-putting and strange. It didn't flow. It felt like a different book. And that's something that really annoyed me. It felt like I was reading a different book or something that had been edited by a different person. And it didn't quite... Like, the first half was beginning to grab me and then it just went wrong. And I'm like, how did that happen? This book had potential. It was better than the first one, definitely. But it wasn't a good book overall. Again, it suffers from feeling like the Shannara Chronicles, and the Shannara Chronicles are hot garbage. And that's something else. There was obviously the Terry Brooks influence. And Terry Brooks, I'm sorry, he can't write. To me, anyway. These are all personal opinions, and my opinions are completely subjective, so... He can't bloody write. It just ended up frustrating me, because I was like... I get what you're trying to do with this, Jordan, but there's no... It didn't work. And it fell apart, especially towards the end. It just felt disjointed and all over the place, and I could rant about that. I will give him credit with this one though. The world, like I said at the start, the world building definitely was a step up. It didn't feel so just dumped on you. It felt more natural. It flowed better. That was fine. Again, it just didn't do anything. And all that good work at the beginning fell apart towards the second half in the end. Story structure was your typical fantasy story, so there's no point talking about that. If you've read one, you've read them all in that sense. Originality is something that I do look for in fantasy, and the problem is Tolkien inspired so much. It was amazing. Yet the problem with it is that a lot of people just wrote Lord of the Rings fanfiction, and this is basically a post-apocalyptic, arthurial Lord of the Rings fanfic that did nothing new, nothing original, nothing interesting. That's my opinion on the book. I'm sorry if you... Well, actually, I'm not sorry if you guys find that offensive. I'm just being honest. There's going to be a couple more of these, so if you're watching this series, please tell me what you think in the comments as always, and I will talk to you later. Book 3. This is where I gave up with The Wheel of Time. The Dragon Reborn undid the small amount of good work that was happening in Book 2, and left me with this very shallow, very boring story. The slow pacing and the all over the place narrative that affected Book 2 at the second half affected this, and it was from the start. It was not well put together. I tried the audiobook as well with all of these, and I tried the written work, and again, the narrator needs to be fired. I couldn't get into it. This one just killed me. I forced myself through nearly to the end, and I DNF'd it at the end, because I could see the payoff coming. I knew what the payoff would be. It was predictable, it was crass, and it was uninteresting. Book 3 is not as bad as Book 1, but this one definitely took the biscuit for just I don't give a shit. I stopped caring about the characters, I stopped caring about their motives, the fact that their motives and the motivations from the previous book seem to have been pushed aside just for, let's write this because it's epic. And that's just not how to write a fantasy novel. It just felt as if this one was beginning to stretch an idea very thin. Again, like I said in previous videos, don't tell me to read all the way through to book whatever because of the payoff and they get better there. Books should be good from the get-go, not deteriorate. This one deteriorated. And all the problems with the latter half of The Great Hunt come through in this. Again, the Lord of the Rings fan fiction, the Terry Brooks vibe that just kind of just killed me at the end, because it was getting more and more boring, and the information dumping was getting ridiculous. Like, if you're going to write a story of this style, you have to be subtle with some things and big with others. Jordan didn't know what to do. He isn't Tolkien. He doesn't have the language that Tolkien has. He doesn't have that whimsy, that elegance, that strength of writing that Tolkien has. And this book definitely shows that. For me, I got almost to the end. I think I was maybe like 2 chapters away, chapter and a half maybe. And I just hit there and I said, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. And it just ended up being this mess. This messy, slow-paced, fanficky fantasy novel that did nothing original. I mean, even Prior of the Orange Tree was more original than this. And that book's god-awful. For me, with fantasy, I love my big epic fantasy, but it has to be the right kind of big epic fantasy. And there's a lot of writers that don't get any recognition that are far better and superior to Jordan in every shape and term, every form. It's just, that's it. This book killed me, and I got to it, and I just thought, screw it, I'm done. I'm deleting them from my Kindle. I'm not using them from the digital library. And it just got to a point where I was like, I don't care anymore, and that's the problem. And that's just how I felt with them. Like, I've got so much hate for not liking this, but again, like, a book should pull you in from the start, even if writers get better from book 1, yes, but I've never known a series to deteriorate this fast. And I'm like, God knows how many books of this, and I got to the end. Done, dusted. I want something stronger, I want something bigger, I want something better that doesn't feel like someone's just writing Terry Brooks. Lord of the Rings fan fiction that Terry Brooks has already written, and Terry Brooks is a shit writer, and I'd quite happily put Jordan on that list as well. And I know that's bad. I know people hate me, and I know I'm going to get shit for it. I mean, I'm not a big Brandon Sanderson fan, but even he's a better writer than fucking Robert Jordan. I'm just being honest. This is the last video I've done ripping those apart, and I will go back to my normal service later. Have fun, and tell me what you think in the comments below.